Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife's Sanctum podcast. My name is Citizen Strife, and this week I'm going to be talking about a game that I started a playthrough of pretty much last week. But I've played more than enough and have seen more than enough to kind of make my way through the inner workings of it right now, rather than waiting until I'm complete. And that being Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. And having gone through the series as part of my YouTube stuff, this is kind of the perfect time, really, to put a bow on those first three games. Because I talked about the first one a couple years ago, talked about the second one, and pretty much everything I said before bore itself out replaying it again. And, you know, I rewatched footage for this like 2 or 3 months ago before playing it, just so I was familiar with the inner goings of where I'm supposed to go and what to do and what the story is. But the story is kind of the big thing. What Metal Gear Solid 3 does is it takes the stuff from the Solid Snake, Liquid Snake stuff, and turns it back 50 so years, give or take, to the Cold War, and talks about Big Boss, in this game known as Naked Snake. And I think in going back to the Cold War, it doesn't completely get rid of the weird, wacky, crazy shit, you know, the sci-fi stuff that you can do. But I also think it can allow for a little bit of a different style of game. And I think what Kojima was definitely going for was more of the old school James Bond-ish kind of vibe, all the way down to the intro for Snake Eater, which was totally a James Bond thing. You have Major Zero talking about James Bond, you have people talking about movies, you just have, you know, like real life stuff kind of filtered in while you're doing this sneaking mission. It never feels like they're overextending into parody. The only times they do is when you get into the boss fights with people like the Cobra unit, and even then, like, one of the dudes was a dude in a space outfit and a flamethrower, but the other ones are fucking weird as shit. But, you know, then you have a guy who's made of lightning and shit like that. Other than that, like, this is the most grounded that Metal Gear can get, especially coming off of Metal Gear Solid 2 with "I live on through this arm," which I will never not find funny. Sorry, you can't convince me that was one of Kojima's worst ideas. Whether you like it or not, you look at it on the face of it and what they had to do to kind of retcon it, they're just like, what the fuck? At least in this, you do have some weird stuff, but it doesn't detract from a lot of it just being spycraft and trying to do things and working through. A lot of it also has to do with the Cold War and America, Russia, China, you know, battling back and forth. You know, China in the background mostly, but it does feel more politically charged rather than, hey, you're fighting bad guys, let's fight some bad guys, let's do that. Because that political background stuff has always been in Metal Gear. It just didn't take a forefront until you had to kind of scale back on the weirdness and the sci-fi aspect and delve more into the character motivations. Because there's an undercurrent of people not seeming who they really are, and it shines through in every interaction that you have with anybody other than, I would say, Colonel Volgin and the three people on your radio. Because even with those people, you're still like, well, really later on they did this. But for this game's purposes, everyone here is always playing a different kind of thing. And then Snake has to navigate just completing the mission, because his mindset is, I just want to complete this mission. But everything goes topsy-turvy because what he needs to be taught is that friends today, and this is one of the things I got in the most recent episode, was your friend today could be your villain tomorrow. And it also kind of goes back to, Snake and Gray Fox being friends on a battlefield. It's like, your friendship doesn't go away just because you're on different sides. Well, this is a different interpretation of that. Everything you knew is turned on its head because politics and whatnot dictate who you are. The difference of who are you now, a soldier or a person with a gun? It's very, again, I'm not going to say it's the most grounded. It still has elements of some weird stuff, but the reason this succeeds so well is it has a focus on the characters and what the characters are going through and their motivations. And in reality, despite having so much going on, the story is about two people and why they're on different sides of the Cold War and why they're ending up fighting and then what ends up happening afterwards. So this may be a spoilerific review. This may not be. It depends on kind of how I think things through when I'm explaining them. But the game itself also has different mechanics because it's based around 1960s technology as opposed to 2005, which could have existed, could not have existed, was a little bit more sci-fi with a little bit more weird, stuff you could or couldn't do in the future. So you don't have that element. You have historical elements by and large. So a lot of the stuff that you're using in the old Metal Gear Solid games are there in different weapons and different forms. And you're relying more on just not being seen. The idea at play with the game now is surviving the jungle. And on harder difficulties, this bears itself more than others. But the idea of having to be out on your own and not being able to just plop a thing on the screen and know where an enemy is. You have some sonars and some other things, but by and large, you have to see things with your eyes, your ear, hear things with your ears. Work with your people on your radios to tell you, okay, this is safe to eat, or this is bad, or the camo index, you have to change it around and suit the thing. So the game is also focusing on a higher end survivalist method rather than what I was kind of think was more sterile, just shoot guys and get past them. There's a little bit more going on in the game, and that's also a reason why this is widely regarded as the best one. So aside from the characters being in a higher quality, you have the gameplay without going into, say, Metal Gear Solid 5, 15 years later, just completely changing everything into just an absurd level of detail. This was about the best you were going to get, and even Metal Gear Solid 4 felt like a step down in that regard. Metal Gear Solid 3 tried some things, whether it was perfect or not, at least it tried some things and made strides that the first two games really didn't do. But as far as the story, and again, it's pretty simple until you get into which character's on whose side. But you have America and Russia in the Cold War. You have the backdrop of the Cuban Missile Crisis and Kennedy's assassination being kind of a little thing that they pull into as Snake is dropped into Russian airspace. And it's already illegal, but he's supposed to rescue this nuclear weapon scientist named Sokolov. So he does so, only to get caught by a young Ocelot. But Ocelot, being very showman, very flaunty, very just in love with himself, thinks he can do no wrong and whatever, but Snake puts him into the ground and says, well, you've got some skill, but you're not quite there yet. And, tells him, hey, you should use revolvers and whatnot. And, they keep meeting as the game goes along, and Snake keeps getting the better of him just by sheer skill and understanding of battle. And, Ocelot has to learn, can't always make do, I guess. But Ocelot's part of Volgin. Colonel Volgin is the main kind of antagonist for the situation. Volgin is trying to get Sokolov so that he can build this gigantic tank known as the Shagohod. So Metal Gear does not exist yet. This is like 20, 30 years before Outer Heaven. So the idea is there's still a nuclear weapon that can be a pain in the ass, but it takes kind of the form of a giant tank with treads on it. It's just a walking, well, not a walking, it's a tank that can just shoot rockets at high speed, and those end up being nuclear missiles. So you need a giant runway, you need all this stuff. So it's a little different scenario, but Sokolov's the only one who knows how to do it, despite other people in the Russian side of things having their own thing, which ended up being Metal Gear. So you have these competing Russian scientists. You know, Snake meets the other guy, Granin. You know, that conversation's also good too. But the meat of the game is dealing with Ocelot, Volgin, and then the boss. The boss is voiced by Lori Allen. I always remember her as the I forget her name offhand, but she's the female co-host of all the Family Guy newscast stuff. So hearing her as this grizzled veteran badass army lady is just like it's two sides of two different coins you're not expecting. But then again, she's played as the straight person on Family Guy too, so she doesn't. Family Guy is just amazing, but I would say she fits voice-wise because this whole kind of motherly vibe that she has with Snake, even though I would say she's like 50-ish, he's probably late 30s. I don't think... It always feels weird because Snake is always considered this younger guy, this unsure of himself, doesn't get it, but only feels young in the scope of things because him being kind of mid-30s, early 40s in the storyline, you know. But again, I think it informs the relationship that you have this like mentorship, you know, master-student thing, and it never kind of veers into romantic. It's something that Eva, and I'll get to her later, also alludes to, is like, do you love her? And it's like, no, it's deeper than that. It never veers into that. I think there's this thing where you have to have a romantic relationship with, you know, male, female all the time. I don't think that's good, and I think that's something that they sidestep very well. Snake and the boss work very well as this two sides of things. He's very naive and wants to believe that America can do no wrong and is just there to fight for them. The boss, having seen war being what it is, will tell you switching sides is normal. And this is the way it is. I'm just a political tool. And you have to learn that. And you have to learn that just because I was the person who taught you everything doesn't mean that 5 or 6 years later down the line or whatever, doesn't mean that I can't just turn everything on its head. And she ends up defecting to the Soviet Union. While she brings with her these like crazy nuclear weapons, Volgin destroys things. And Snake is kind of left in the dust because he's not, you know, prepared to deal with this person that he was going to fight for betraying him. But as we've seen with other Metal Gear games, betrayal is something that comes easy. So not only does Snake get in trouble, but the people who are supporting him, Major Zero and Paramedic, are also kind of in shit creek too. So they're given another chance in Operation Snake Eater, legit. So the framing is Sokolov is in Groznygrad building the Shagohod. So you have to go a little bit further this time rather than just sneaking in for an hour and going. And now the boss has sent not only Ocelot to go after him, but the Cobra unit. And I will say the Cobra unit acting as Foxhound, Dead Cell, it's it it becomes. I'm of two minds of this. I like the fact that boss fights are supernatural in nature, but I also understand that while it works a little in Metal Gear Solid 2 and they still try to make it a little sense, you still have people like Vamp, you still have people like Liquid Snake being in a person's arm. You know, there's just a suspension. I'm thinking of it kind of like a wrestling program or a magic show. There's a suspension of disbelief that you need to have to kind of make it work. And the Pain is a dude who can surround himself in hornets. Yeah, they make it sound like he gets stabbed by hornets while he's doing it, sure. But the fact that he can control them and whatnot, like, what was he, a beekeeper? Was he a hornet keeper? Like, what was his thing? How does he do that? How does he turn it into hornet grenades? How does he do that? How is the Fear this weird, like, circusy kind of performer with all these weird gymnastic things and weird limbs and, like, he's got the super long fucking tongue like Toad from the X-Men movie. Like, the end is this photosynthetic sniper guy with these crazy eyes and he turns into a tree. Like, ugh, my brain. Like, I'm in this hard-boiled, you know, half James Bond, half, you know, Cold War narrative, and then these guys are coming in off the train of wacky land, and the only one that isn't, like, the super fucking weird one is the Fury, who's, you know, I can buy him being a guy who was in space and went nuts and started shooting things with a flamethrower. He's a little grounded in interpretation. And then you have the Sorrow, who's this phantom guy who fights you because people have died and he fought himself and controls dead. It's weird. I'm splitting hairs because I'm of two minds of it, because I like when Metal Gear Solid is grounded in some sort of realism, like in Metal Gear 1, and I'm willing to accept a little bit of weirdness because it is Hideo Kojima, and you just gotta let yourself go and let it happen. But when you're fighting against this master-student relationship of the boss, and everybody like Eva, who, you know, I still haven't gotten to yet now to think about it, Ocelot, all these people fighting against all these people and, you know, fighting narratives. It's just like, you're doing this spycraft stuff and then you're showing this weird kooky sci-fi bullshit on the side. It's kind of like watching a wrestling show and you're having this blood feud, and then all of a sudden on the other channel you're having Kane and Undertaker do spooky lightning. You know, it can exist in the same thing, but you can understand where at some point there's a little bit of element of no, please, no. So you just accept it because it's done as well as it can. But there's still that element, and I hope that makes sense. There's still an element of disbelief that I can't just shake. It's not as bad as Liquid having an arm and manipulating a dude while he's dead. But it veers into that a little bit. But anyway, getting back to the topic at hand, Snake is in the Sokolov research facility, faces off against Ocelot again, but now he meets Eva, who is voiced by Suzette Mignette. I don't know how to pronounce it. It has that tilde sign there. She is an operative, an NSA operative known as Eva. Apparently Adam was supposed to meet him as the contact, but Eva did instead, which again frames the narrative. Who do you trust? How do you trust her? Turns out she's working undercover in the Sokolov research facility as Tatiana as well. You see her on that side at the end of the Virtuous mission. So you know she's kind of playing both sides, and where her allegiance ends up lying, you never quite know. But she ends up filling this interesting role of not only being the James Bond girl, but having like a respect for the boss while still being, you know, playing both sides. The boss is the best part of this game, and it's not even close. because she is this ever-present threat that you have to get rid of. The Russians have said you not only have to get the Shagohod and destroy it, you not only have to stop Volgin because he's doing that, you have to get rid of the boss so that America can kind of like work through it. So Snake's entire situation, not only dealing with the weird spooky nonsense of the Cobra unit, he's got to deal with the jungle, he's got to deal with going through other research facilities. I think one of my favorite parts of the game, despite it being a little claustrophobic at times, is actually being in one of the research facilities before you deal with Granin, is changing from the jungle to the inside of a building, a research facility, and kind of sneaking past guards and having to see Snake Snake in this grizzled face of his, with all these scars and shit. He's a lot taller than anybody else. So he's sneaking past guards as this scientist. And if scientists spot him, you have to hit them with this cigar smoke that knocks them out. But if they see you, you're fucked and you have to deal with that. So there's a little bit of you're dealing with the jungle flora and fauna and snakes and guards and all the shit. Now you're going into this urban area. I think the game is great at kind of mixing in just enough urban warfare with the jungle environment to change it up, because a lot of times in, say, Shadow Moses or Big Shell, you're doing the same things over and over. They're changing what you're doing any given time, but the environment is almost always the same. It's buildings. It's fighting in buildings. It's fighting around in the snow. At least now you're kind of varying between, I'm in the jungle, now I'm in the mud pits, now I'm in a small research facility, now I'm in the mountains, now I'm in a whatever, now I'm in whatever. They give you different places to sneak around in and fight in different things. And it isn't just a jungle cruise, because that alone, as fun as being in the jungle is and all the camo stuff, giving you some urban style of sneaking around and avoiding some researchers, and not just researchers but guards and such, while you're trying to sneak around and getting into the bigger location, the final location of the game. And then you end up fighting the boss in this crazy field, this white field of flowers, and her camo is pure white and you can't see a shit. So you either have the thermal goggles to pretty much trivialize the fight like you do with a couple boss fights, or you have a hard as hell time trying to figure out where she's coming from, because she will kick the shit out of you. The game does a great job of balancing what needs to be balanced with your skill level, and that's why it has so many different difficulties. I'm playing on easy, so being able to just kind of let loose and enjoy the story is nice, but I'm still able to be stealthy because they have the easy gun, because I'm not great at the camo stuff. But being able to change what you're doing in any environment to suit your need, changing your camo because you have 20, 30 different types of camo. And you can even, if you fight the Cobra unit and you wear them down, you get their camo and they have special, buffs attached to them. The end can replenish your stamina, or the boss, or I think it was the Sorrow, honestly. The Sorrow eliminates your footstep sounds. Cool stuff like that the normal camos don't provide. It's a unique mechanic, and it allows you to be a little careful with how you deal with some of the boss fights, because just like in Metal Gear Solid 2, you can destroy their stamina gauge rather than kill them outright. But by and large, they mostly die anyway. But it is cool that you can still get their camo in that way. It gives you a challenge. As far as fighting themselves, the battles take enough of what you've done, and they build on the systems of what you've done with Metal Gear Solid 2, and adding in a few different things that you have. You don't have the Soliton radar system, so you're kind of left at the mercy of sonar or motion detection. You do have a little bit, but the radar isn't some impenetrable overlay. You have to kind of wait for the thing to work, and sometimes it's easy to get caught by an enemy if you're wandering around. You're also dealing with stuff like alligators and such, snakes if you're crawling around. Stuff will hurt you if you're wandering around. You get hit, attached by leeches and whatnot if you're in a swamp or something. So you're fighting stuff that isn't just guards or some of the bosses. You're given different things to deal with. At the same time, they added in a higher level of combat, the idea of CQC. So Snake learned these techniques from the boss. So certain weapons have like one-handed effects, so you can still like grab a guard and knock them out and throw them to the ground, or you can hold them, with your knife and interrogate them, but you hold them enough and you're not, to kill them outright, alert guards, or make it, there's still an element that running and gunning can be an effective strategy, but you don't have to. And they actually weave a boss fight concept they create it in such a way that killing people does not actually help you. And in fact, the more you kill people, the worse your boss fight against a certain fight is. So it's a cool way of incentivizing you, not just for the later score at the end of the game. It incentivizes you to not have a struggle in one of the boss fights, to not kill people. So as long as you're stealthy and you don't deal with it, that boss fight is pretty much rendered toothless by comparison. If you kill everything that moves, you're going to be ducking and dodging and taking damage from pretty much everything. So it was a cool idea I wasn't even expecting. So that's one of the best boss fights in the game. And again, those boss fights, as much as I'm ragging on the characters and the power sets they have, the fights themselves are set pieces. The pain is just a straightforward, I'm going to fight you in this place, but I'm throwing bees and hornets at you. The fight against the fear is this like fight in this vast jungle area where you're dealing with this guy who can use stealth camo and is super fast, and his drawback is he runs out of stamina, but you can like poison him, or I even, oh god, I saw it. I remember seeing this person in this video using the fake death pill, waiting for the fear to come up to him, reviving, and then just shooting the shit out of him and getting his camo. I'm shocked how they managed to pull that off, but they did it. I was never good enough to get the fear's camo outright because he always replenishes it. So it always felt like I was fighting up the wrong tree. He's one of the few people I actually tend to just up and shoot and kill. The end is an interesting story because by and large I try to avoid that fight if whenever possible. But you can avoid it. I love that the game gives you opportunities to avoid the fight. Almost as if to say, when they created it, they realized, yeah, this fight kind of sucks. If you want to, you can avoid it. The trick with the end is he is this legendary, super old sniper guy who's technically dead, but will come back to life if he needs to shoot a guy when the boss demands it. And the boss has demanded it, so he awakes for one more showdown with Snake. His thing is he's going to try and trank you with his super sniper rifle and then send you back to prison. You escape, whatever, but whatever. The end isn't trying to kill you. So that's an interesting way of looking at it. But his boss fight is frustrating. The way it works is he's got 3 different zones, and they're all very big. Imagine the zones that you fight the fear in, this long, big jungle area, but there's 3 of them. And the fear, or the end, can sit in any of them and snipe at you. And you have to, spend time trying to figure out where he's going to be. And you can sneak up on him here and there. Usually he'll be shooting at you if he finds you if you find him in the right spot. If you find him in an area, he will be shooting at you because he can see you. So your goal is to try and track him down with like tree branches and footprints and smashed shrubbery, or you can just use the thermal goggles and track his footprints from every location and then sneak up on him and shoot him with ease, and do that. That's what I tend to do. Or if you're lucky, you can actually do two different methods in getting rid of him. One, you can set the internal clock of your PlayStation to like a week or 2 weeks later, and he dies of old age. The other method is he's actually kind of just sitting in a chair in one of the warehouses at like early to midpoint of the game, and if you shoot him with a gun, like a sniper rifle or something, if you shoot him, he explodes and you don't have to do the boss fight. Odds are I'm not going to do that when I actually play it, because I'm probably going to deal with the fight legit to show it off, but I'm going to have the thermal goggles, so I'm going to have less of a frustration, because the benefit of the thermal goggles is you can see where he is at all times because of the footprints. If you do it legit, it becomes an arduous annoyance, and it's boring itself out by being one of the more annoying boss fights. It's a great set piece, but annoying in execution. And then the Fury, again, much like the Pain, is just a straightforward fight. It feels a lot like the fight against Vulcan Raven in the first game, where if you're in line with him, he shoots you. So you got to sneak around and avoid him and then shoot him in the back. So pretty self-explanatory. After the two fights against the Fear in the end, it's kind of a nice, like, hey, I'm good. And then, of course, the Sorrow later is its own weird thing. You're fighting the Sorrow, and he's coming to bring everybody's vengeance against you. So if you kill anyone, including the bosses, they come after you. But if you do what I tend to do and not fight them and kill them, then there's less dudes coming by and sapping your health. So it's an interesting, like I said, suspension of disbelief, but given just the aura of that fight in itself, and it's not really, it's a fight. It's a fight that's essentially just a walking cutscene, But, and then you fight Volgan, and then you fight the boss, and those are more straightforward. Really, what it comes down to with the story and the battle system is the idea that you're having everything work for you, and you're trying to work out, as the story progresses, which lie is the closest to the truth. Because when you get to Volgan and you get to Groznygrad, he tells you what his main motivation is. Yeah, he's got the Shagohod thing, but he's also got an endless amass of funds. And then you realize what the true objective is. Trying to steal a massive amount of wealth that he has stockpiled. And who's going to get it, where they're going to get it, why do you want to get it, who has it, where is it locked, and all this stuff. Volgan realizes that a lot of people are after him, and now he has to fight off Snake. He's also dealing with the boss and Eva and Ocelot, and you see that Ocelot is slowly kind of like, is he who he says he is? We know that he's not, and we know that Ocelot is always playing the field to suit his needs, and this is like the origins of that. But then you see where Eva and the boss and Snake have to navigate that as well. Everybody's playing everybody else. And the truth is somewhere hidden within all of the lies. And the narrative is the strongest point of the game, aside from the uniqueness of the survival and the camo mechanic. The camo mechanic is when you're in a jungle environment, you use jungle camo in the menu and face paint, stuff like that, to improve your camo index. Otherwise, enemies will spot you. You try to crawl on the ground more, otherwise they'll spot you. If you're on very easy, you get this thing called the easy gun, which kind of sets you at 80%, which is this kind of good middle ground of saying you're never going to get caught as long as you're careful. But by and large, if you're in an urban area, you want a different type of camo. If you're in the fact that they had to spend all this time changing that camo index every time you step on a different environment or a different part of the game, somebody had to spend hours figuring that shit out and making sure it was consistent. The one drawback is that with this, and then the camo in the face thing, and the new medical system. So the medical system is if you get cut, you have to wrap the bandage and, disinfect it and whatnot. Because you have these like red bars. There'll be static damages and you have temporary HP loss. And your bar will no longer go up to full anymore. Because you have a ration, but if you have, say, a bee sting, a leech is on you, a broken bone or whatever, if you don't heal that, your health will stay at a certain percentage of what it was based on the damage that you incurred. So you have to go through the survival viewer to handle that. What I will say is a lot like Secret of Mana, this tends to be a problem when it comes to menuing. I like Secret of Mana, but the amount of menuing you have to do magic spells and to heal and all this stuff, it feels a lot reminiscent of that. By adding in the survival viewer, the camo index, changing the camo, changing your face paint, doing all the backpacking, so you don't run out of stamina, but you have enough stuff. So you're not only having the L&R menus, you have the survival viewer, the menu, and that can be its own annoyance that distracts you from going around and fighting things. You have to check the map because you don't have topography. You have the map in the survival viewer, so you got to check the map to make sure you're not turned around by the environment being very convoluted. Not so much in an urban setting, but in the jungles, it's easy to get lost because you're thinking, where the fuck am I supposed to go? So that's something I'm dealing with as well, is just a lot more menuing in this game as opposed to the first two. But as a whole package, you're still, you still have this increased sense of scope. They've dialed back on some of the craziness of the sci-fi setting to give you a more spycraft, James Bond-esque thing, and it works well because the characters are written so well. And the mentor-student relationship at the core of this is something so basic, so simple, layered into the political drama. And I'm not really one for political intrigue and shit like that, but this is one of those times I'm really okay with it because of the message that soldiers are just pawns in military games. They're nothing more than tools. And you can see why that would drive Big Boss mad, and then he became one of the main antagonists for the early Metal Gear games. Why he becomes such a mythic figure in the Solid franchise. This is a game designed to close that loop, to give you that origin story, but it does it in a way that it informs you how Ocelot became to be the fucking madman that he is. You get just enough of the weirdness of the bosses and the stuff, but you're knuckling down into the subterfuge. A simple story about who can you trust and why you can't trust anybody but yourself at times, and what it means to be a soldier in a political environment, in a political vacuum, and fighting through that. So that is really why Metal Gear Solid 3 stands the test of time for me. I would say gameplay-wise, even though I'm not as much a fan of it, I would say 2 is still the best. Environment-wise, Metal Gear Solid 1, I just can't go against the Shadow Moses bleakness of the environment. But as an overall package and an overall story, Metal Gear Solid 3 just beats the shit out of them with a stick. It's not even close. The dynamic between the Snake and the boss alone is better than anything in the first two games. And those are really strong games. But they do so much with 3 that it's hard to not accept that this is the best game of the 3. That bears it out. A lot of people said so. Replaying it again and re-experiencing the story, getting to feel that and seeing it play out and play in an action while not detracting too much from the gameplay aspect, because that's what Metal Gear Solid 2's problem is there's not enough gameplay to suit it. At least with this, they give you enough bells and whistles so that the gameplay still feels like, yeah, you're watching a movie, but you're still at least playing the game. So Metal Gear Solid 3 is really good. Would I recommend playing it? Well, it's a no-brainer. Any Metal Gear Solid game is still a good experience, even if it's not always the easiest to get through. But if you want a game that is telling you an interesting story with interesting mechanics, you can do no wrong. But that'll do for today. I kind of meant for this to go a little shorter, but I had so many things I was trying to dig into that it probably went a little bit longer than I would have liked. This was one I had to make on the fly. I was going to wait till Saturday to do it, but I decided get it done while I had a day off, and then get back to recording more Metal Gear and Yakuza while I was at it. So I can definitely feel it in my voice. I'm a little shot right now, so I bet I've been talking for a while. But hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys can understand why I had to kind of bounce around back and forth, because everything kind of filters into their, nothing about Metal Gear Solid is just, this is this part, this is this part, this is this. Everything feeds in on itself in one way or another. So this one was a bit of a long one, but I enjoyed it, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this one as well. I'll do the top anime openings and endings and then Xenosaga 2 in the next couple of weeks, and I'll see you next time. Citizen Strife, signing off.